Day 6 to 2:47 p.m. Multipurpose Clubhouse, Città Italia, Molino 3, Bacoor City, Cavite. Sir, is it really fine to let him do that? One of the younger soldiers asked Major Lopez after Mark and his group left, leaving 2 trails of blood on their path from the 2 bodies Amica bound in her vines. The major, on the other hand, replied another question. What do you think, Rail? It's against the law, Private Rail replied. To the young soldier's reply, however, Major Lopez shook his head. If it was 6 days ago, you're right. Now, however, the country's law could only apply inside the settlements the government founded. Here outside, we are all equals. Only those who have strength can dictate the rules here. Not only Rail heard that, but other soldiers too, making them fall into contemplation. Major Lopez patted the young soldier's shoulder. You all needed to adjust. Besides, you all heard what happened. None of these people are innocent. That chameleon only received what he deserved. It's an issue between their groups, and we don't have the right to interfere as long as our side was not implicated in any way. Actually, I won't have any qualms if he killed all these trash. We'll have less useless people to feed that way. The nonchalant attitude the major had in his voice when he sentenced the members of the syndicate to death made everyone around that heard him reveal troubled expressions. Even though he had a point, many of them still felt that it was unnecessary. The major then clapped his hands, taking everyone's attention. Stop thinking about unnecessary things. We still have things to do. We need to leave this place before dark, or none of us will see the sun tomorrow. Major urged everyone to efficiently use the time they had to prepare. Furthermore, there was still the need to bring the hostages here and prepare to leave. Those people held by the syndicate might not be in good shape for traveling, but none of them had the choice if they wanted to survive. Probably, just hiding in some place as the large horde passed by might possibly save some people, but the opposite could also be possible. Another thing they needed to do was think of what to do about Jumper, who did nothing in the whole fight and surrendered without qualms afterwards. None of them knew what was going on in the mind of this man. Odile, you tell Carlo to fetch his sister, Mark said as they watched the vehicles that left before return. With what happened earlier, it was impossible that the people inside that van in front of the clubhouse did not see everything. Given that, Carlos's sister would surely not go with them even if they said that they knew her brother. It would be better if Carlo was the one to face his sister. Amica, cover the bodies tightly, we don't want Jeanette and the other one to go crazy. Mark turned towards the little dryad. Okay, by the way, you slipped out, didn't you? Your mother is angry. Amica did not reply, but her face paled. She looked at Mark and noticed something. Nay, uncle. Isn't that heavy? She pointed at Mark's back. There, the oversized beetle was still latched on his back. Not really. It's kind of itchy though. Mark replied before knocking on one of Fane's legs and made the beetle go down from his back. At the beginning, he wanted Fine to become as a means of escape if he was suddenly besieged by the 3 mutators at the same time, while Abigail and Odilina were not able to aid him. However, the 3rd mutator did not attack at all, while the other even severely injured their leader. Even though he said all those words when Chameleon berated him, Mark knew that Jumper had no plan to join the fight at all. The only thing the beetle had been a help for was directing the sneak attack Chameleon tried to make. Though it was not impossible to do even without Fine, it became easier since more than half of his back was blocked by the beetle, making the areas Chameleon could attack very limited. Finally, the other vehicles arrived and stopped in front of them. Mark nodded to Odilina to tell Carlo the news. Hearing that his sister was actually here, Carlo did not waste any time and set off with Sundra to check. Carlo's face did not look happy though. He would rather not see his sister here. It was not because he did not want to see her, but finding any of his family members here could simply mean a bad news afterwards. While Carlo went to look for his sister, Mark was thinking of what he should do with the bodies of these 2 mutators. He could either store the ability of one, since he only had 1 empty physical crystal left, and feed the other one to either Jeanette or... What's her name again? Ah, right, I never asked them. Mark realized that he had forgotten to ask about the name of Harvey and Monique's infected daughter. In the end, he concluded that Chameleon's body was useless. His advanced camouflage might be good sounding, but it was an ability that could only be used while naked. Chameleon's body that was bound by Emika's vines was fully naked. It was just that Emika never needed to see everything her vines could bind, or it would be inappropriate to let the girl do so. Chameleon's ability could only hide his body, and the clothes and weapons were excluded. This ability could not be used while bringing anything, whether it be clothes or weapons. Doing so renders the ability useless. Without weapons and without protection, this ability could only hide the user while being prone to danger. Mark could not feed Chameleon's brain to the infected girls too. As the nature of these girls was all a mystery to him, the chance of them becoming out of control and attacking people was not zero. If by any chance that they acquired an invisibility or camouflage ability, it could spell disaster in many ways. Black Devil's ability, however, was very precious. Since it could render his body impervious to bullets and give tremendous strength, he would rather keep it for use later. The only thing he needed to do now was to find a place to extract Black Devil's ability, or maybe not. Mark took the bag containing the jar of crystals from inside the vehicle and looked at Emika. "Emika, can you make something like a room or a dome using your vines?" Let me try." With great enthusiasm, Emika made her hair grow longer and longer before creating a small yurt-shaped structure about 2.5 meters in diameter. At the center inside the yurt was Emika, who could not move. Even though her vines could support it, it seemed that it would be hard for her to walk around while maintaining the structure. Looking at the beads of sweat on her forehead, it looked like she was doing her best to do it for the first time. He'll surely reward this girl for her effort to help. A frozen chocolate bar should do it. "Emika, this is enough. Move Chameleon's body outside." Okay. It did not take long for Mark to complete the procedure. The yurt made of vines, however, seemed to have attracted the attention of everyone around that they started to gather. After making Emika remove the yurt, the only thing revealed was Black Devil's dead body on the ground in front of Mark and Emika. Unexpectedly, among the people around them was Jeanette, who Mara was trying to pull back without avail. Jeanette saw the dead body and kneeled beside it and started sniffing the body, but she did nothing else. She looked at Mark with a sad expression on her face. Mark was surprised to see her make that expression, but also felt helpless at the same time. Jeanette really saw him as her source of food for some reason, and because she was his precious specimen, he was obligated to do so. There was still Chameleon's body hidden by Emika, but it was a no-go. How about I kill Jumper and feed him to Jeanette? That sinister thought suddenly popped out of his mind. However, it was already late. Jumper did not make a move on him and fully surrendered to the soldiers. During that time Chameleon was narrating all his deeds and history. Jumper had no reaction to it and did not look him with hostility. Rather, it felt like everything that Chameleon said had nothing to do with him. At the moment, Jumper was being asked questions by the soldiers, and it seemed that he readily answered everything he knew. Mark patted Jeanette's head. "Next time, all right." The weak disappointment on Jeanette's consciousness finally replaced with agreement. She even rubbed her head on his hand on her own. It somehow felt like he was raising a kitten. He was also amazed how fast her consciousness was developing. By the looks of it, making Mara take care of her affected her a lot, since Mara did not alienate her for being an infected and still treated her as her sister and as a human. After that, Mark dumped Chameleon's body back to the soldiers. He did not mind what they would do with the body as long as they did not leave it in the open. In the end, Chameleon's body was put inside a body bag and put inside the frontmost dump truck, as that vehicle had the most space left to use. Compared to the other bodies, Chameleon's body was still a good specimen, no matter how battered his body became after Mark's torture. The other dead bodies were burned in a dug hole, and Mark dumped Black Devil's body in the same fire despite the protests of the soldiers. He could not let them know that Black Devil's body was nothing but a dead infected now. Since Black Devil's brain was damaged before his mutation was extracted, he did not turn, but considering what happened to Dominator, Black Devil would likely turn into one if his brain was not damaged by the bullets. Everything else went smoothly after the threat was eliminated. Mark also managed to take a nap while the survivors in Città Italia finished their delayed preparations. It was the same for the people that became hostages. The injured received the best treatment the medics and doctors of the military could give. Among those injured people was SP-02 Agbayani, who was the mutator from Firenze. Apparently he had a clash with Black Devil before and ended up being beaten badly. No wonder why the righteous policeman was not around. Carlo's sister, Carmela, confirmed his fear. Aside from her, who was treated terribly by the members of the syndicate along with the other women they captured, all their family members ended up being killed by the heartless thugs or by the mindless infected. Even though that the siblings had a reunion after the apocalypse started, their reunion was very far from being festive. Carlo's mind was in turmoil from both sadness and anger. The soldiers, the police and the government officials also heard the stories of the women and the people taken as hostage. Enraged, they all ended up in a consensus. With the exception of Jumper, who was a mutator and agreed to comply with the soldiers, the other members of the syndicate were brought into an execution. The execution was more brutal. Not wanting to waste ammunition on these people, they were all tied with disposable ropes and were thrown to the fire alive along with the dead bodies. More than 2 more hours passed and the preparations ended. Before anything like another swarm of flies or mosquitoes appeared, the leaders decided to set off. If everything went smoothly on the way and according to the initial plan, the convoy would likely reach Bay City a few hours before midnight. Day 6 to 5:03 p.m. Molino Boulevard, Ligas, Bacoor City, Cavite. The sounds of gunfire continued along the way. The convoy had already driven past the compound of the ruined city hall several minutes ago. They were closing into the most populated area of Bacoor. Because of that, the number of infected they were encountering started to increase, but in the least, not too many, and were too scattered to call a horde. Irene sat at the back carrier of one of the Humvees while hugging her assault rifle. As there was not much danger after the syndicate was eliminated in Città Italia, things that she did not have time to think of before started entering her mind that she could not concentrate too much on shooting even after they left. Every single one of the soldiers and police were obligated to participate in defending the convoy, but with all the thoughts in her mind, she could not effectively. "What are you thinking?" Keen, who was paired with her, finally asked. The guy was really dense that he did not notice that there was something weighing her thoughts. If not for her suddenly sitting back after firing a round of gunshots at the infected charging at them, he would not have noticed. "A lot of things," Irene sighed. She knew that the thoughts she had right now was unnecessary, but it was really bugging her. What was right and what was wrong? How evil could a person get? Back at the settlement, when Mark suddenly shoved them into the multi-cab, she felt annoyed, but after witnessing the horror the swarm of flies brought to them, she was shaken. She was shaken not only because of fear but because she actually felt relief that she was not among the people who died outside. She saw several soldiers and people stung by the flies and turned into infected. At that scene, she somehow felt happy that she was not in their shoe. It made her feel conflicted. She was a soldier and she should be one of the people protecting them, but was it really all right to feel happy that she survived and the people she was supposed to protect died? The next thought came to her when the soldiers started to burn the remaining members of the syndicate alive. At that scene, was it really all right that she saw those men not as human but animals? She could not help but ask herself how those people were able to commit such devilish acts. According to the hostages and what Jumper confessed, aside from Jumper, every single one of them was a devil in human skin. The hostages came from 2 sources. The first were those who were caught while they were evacuating, while the second ones were those who were found during the supply runs of the syndicate. Nevertheless, both faced the same kind of torment. The able ones, mainly composed of men, were forced to work on their base building defenses and fighting the infected. For the women, they became a means of entertainment for the members of the syndicate. The main problem and the cause for the soldiers to burn those animals alive were due to the point that the syndicate did not share their supplies to their hostages. On the head count, there were 123 hostages, and even more than that before for sure. With that large number of people, how were they fed? The hostages did not know it and only knew that they were fed with boiled salted meat. On Jumper's confession, however, The source of that meat was not something that humans in the right mind should consume. It was fortunate that the meat did not come from the infected, but it just made the whole thing even darker. The hostages would likely lose their mind if they learn about the source of that meat. Jumper, on the other hand, seemed to be appreciated by the hostages. It seemed that he did not touch any of the women and even incurred the ridicule of the other members for taking in the children, saying that he had a weird fetish. The children, however, were all fine, and by the looks of it, Jumper rather took good care of them. Now that the threat of the syndicate, Jumper let the children return to their relatives. It was unfortunate that some of those children had no relatives to return to anymore. When Jumper was asked why he did that when he was a member of that syndicate, "Do all of you really believe that I wanted to join them? I just had no choice." That was how he answered. Irene told her thoughts to her childhood friend. Unexpectedly, Keen laughed. "What's funny? I'm serious here. Just don't think too much. What those thugs did was wrong, but what's wrong with surviving? Don't think too much. Just follow what you believe in, just like before." "What I believe, that's right. As long what you believe isn't wrong, it's fine. If you really care for those who died, then live for their sake and perform what they could not anymore. That's simple." Irene lifted her head and looked at Keen incredulously. What she received from him was a straightforward and brainless answer, but she could not refute him at all. Irene sighed. She should think over this once more later and ask someone else more experienced. *******, Day 6 to 6:23 p.m. Emilio Aguinaldo Highway, Talaba, Bacoor City, Cavite. About another 2 hours passed once more after they left Città Italia. They had already left Molino Boulevard and entered the highway, but their speed horribly suffered. If it was before the outbreak, the distance they traversed from Città Italia till their current location would just take about half an hour with the normal rate of heavy traffic considered. Now, however, the blockade of vehicles at the exit of the boulevard started their current headache. Even though the dump trucks still managed to get them out of the boulevard, it was because the vehicles blocking the boulevard exit were smaller vehicles with freezer vans as the largest ones. After entering the highway, however, it became harder for them to move, that even the military trucks started to help in pushing the smaller vehicles aside. Another problem was the increasing number of infected they needed to defend the convoy from. This area was too close to a large street market, several malls, fast food chains, and more enclosed markets. These establishments caused the population influx in this area. Even though the infected that was left here was a smaller portion compared to the whole population that frequented this area, it was still enough to give everyone a huge headache. If the infected attacking was not handled effectively, it could spell disaster. It was more apparent with the constant appearance of mutated infected. The rather most common among the mutated infected were the dozers. There were also infected animals from time to time, and some new kinds of mutated infected appearing in the area. Rat-a-tat-tat. Mark jumped onto an abandoned vehicle and killed several infected charging towards him. He was hired to escort the convoy, and he had to participate in thinning the number of infected. Together with him, he could see Abigail running about fast like the wind. In terms of kill count, she could not compare to those who had guns, but with physical kills, she had the highest number. From time to time, Mark would also use his machete to save a few bullets, but the kill speed was rather insufficient to keep up with the stream of incoming infected. He had no choice but to use his gun. His presence on the battlefield, however, caused to lighten the load on the soldiers in one way or another. Not only that the number of infected the soldiers had to kill lessened, but also the pressure on everyone fighting the infected decreased significantly. It was due to the mutated infected charging towards him every single time, despite how close they were to another person. The other members of his group also joined the fray since earlier due to the slow movement of the convoy through this heavy blockade. Nikki and her other group members defended the southern side, while Jason and his group defended the northern side. Mark and Abigail, on the other hand, moved from place to place, helping where the highest congregation of infected were located near their position. Not only Mark and his group, but the other soldiers had already moved out of their vehicles to help. Captain De La Rosa and Major Lopez could also be seen fighting the infected near the front of the convoy. It was the same for Chief Mallory and his police force. Mark looked at the passenger seat of their vehicle where May sat. He told both Abigail and Odalina not to tell anything about what Chameleon said. It was not because she should not learn about it, but it was better for her to not know. Besides, he himself could not remember what happened that night. If what Chameleon and Black Devil said was true, then it was not him who did the killing. For all he remembered, the first human, or at least, looked like human, he killed in real life was the infected security guard at the mall. As for who did it, it could not be any more obvious. He also suspected it when he woke up at home after all those things happened at that time. He would also not forget that time. It was because of those injuries that he started to completely disregard the outside world and stay within the confines of his house as much as possible. He was sure that it was Freed who did it. What for? Why did he save May that time? Mark had no way of asking Freed for answers. Even though the two of them may be sharing the same body, it was impossible for the two to meet face to face and clear everything. Sighing, he shot the head of another infected he was facing. Mark looked at the road ahead. Seeing the scene in front, he could not help but shake his head. It seemed that this parade of abandoned cars would last till the exit of the highway. Furthermore, it looked like that the convoy would still move at its current speed till the end due to the large number of city and provincial buses that blocked the road. Mark took out his phone. Seeing the current time, he frowned. They were running late. It was already almost 7 and they were still stuck here. Did anything went wrong? Mark started to contemplate. As Mark did not know anything about what would happen before the scene in his premonition started, he just followed every circumstance in a normal way. Then, why? Mark started to have a bad feeling about this. Day 6 to 7:58 p.m. Cavite Expressway Tollgate, Parañaque, Metro Manila. They spent some more time on the highway and even lost several soldiers and policemen in the process. Mark could not deny that the constant fighting within about 4 hours was tiring. After they entered the expressway, however, the convoy started to move faster as the number of vehicles in the expressway decreased in numbers. It did not take too long though, and the convoy had no choice but to stop. The dump trucks could push smaller cars effortlessly and push larger vehicles like buses and trucks with quite a difficulty. Nevertheless, there was no way for it to push a whole collapsed building blocking the expressway. Blocking the middle of the road, it was the whole toll ticketing booth structure that fell to the ground. The whole heavy roof of the structure was still intact and it looked like that the metal supports were bent to the ground. Everyone was in a dilemma. Mark, however, started to get ready for another life and death encounter. Day 6 to 8:04 p.m. E3 Expressway, Parañaque, Metro Manila. 1 meter thick, 16 meters wide and 100 meters long. That was how large the structure was in front of them, blocking the entirety of the less than 100-meter expressway. The whole structure was made of pure concrete along with its metal foundations. Aside from that structure that used to shelter that actual toll ticketing booths underneath it, there were also a large number of abandoned vehicles that littered the place. Even under the large structure, there were a lot of remains vehicles that were crushed by its weight. There were 3 lanes of the toll area that was free of vehicles, and the vehicles outside those 3 lanes were seemingly pushed aside. It had just meant that before the structure collapsed, there were people that passed this place. After shortly investigating the area, they concluded that the people that passed by should be the convoy led by General Perez, son First Lieutenant Rafael. They were sure about that because they also received that report, and the bullet casings that were left scattered in the area had serials belonging to the military. The soldiers were also sure that the collapse of this structure happened just recently, considering how much dust could be seen in the surroundings. There was even a lingering smell of concrete in the air despite not closing in towards the collapsed structure. Should we call unto Bay City for assistance? Captain De La Rosa suggested to Major Lopez, who was beside him. They looked at the structure and around the area to see if there would be any alternative routes they could take. To the east side of the expressway, there was a small emergency road that should only be accessed if there were emergencies at the expressway. That same road now was filled with abandoned vehicles. The dump trucks had no way to push those vehicles aside as there was no extra space to push the vehicles to. That was how narrow that road was. They could remove the vehicles one by one, but it would surely take a lot of time to do so. Past the safety barriers of the expressway, the west side was a forested slope directly connected to Manila Bay, while the east side was a highly forested block. Breaking the safety barriers on either side was not plausible either. Going back and finding another route was not possible either. The nearest roads going the same direction were all two-lane streets. Those narrow roads would disrupt the formation of the vehicles, and a lot of areas on the convoy would be vulnerable to attacks. It was because the narrow roads would prevent the military vehicles from moving freely. Calling for assistance from Bay City was all that they could do. Bay City was still more than 4 kilometers away from this place. If they could hold their ground till the assistance arrived, they should be able to find a way to deal with the collapsed toll plaza. Mark wore a backpack filled with magazines that had just been filled by everyone inside the vehicle. While Mark and the others were fighting outside, the work of everyone inside was to fill in the empty magazines with the right ammunition. After they left the heavy traffic area near Zapote, Mark started to pack up the filled magazines into his backpack and took out several guns from the back of the vehicle. When the convoy stopped, Mark finally stood up with 3 guns hanging on his body. None of them could understand what their leader was going to do with all that weapons and ammunition. The last time some of they saw him do that was back then, when he retrieved his things from his house facing thousands of infected alone. Melissa looked outside. Anna and the others who thought the same also looked out of the window. The place was rather empty, and the soldiers and police were already dealing with the infected around the place. Why was Mark preparing this much? Not saying anything to them, Mark walked out of the vehicle. May followed behind him, and Odalina on the driver's seat did the same. As if sensing something ominous, the 2 little girls did not want to get left behind. Stepping outside the vehicle, what Mark did first was to look at the sky and onto the southbound lanes of the expressway. The moon was already shining above them, illuminating the whole place. However, this only made Mark frown even more. He then made his way to the back to unchain the motorbike from the back of the vehicle. "Gerger, is this the place?" May asked while looking around. Odalina was doing the same. Remembering what Mark told them last night, their hearts were pounding with nervousness. He told them that everyone would die once that monster he saw in his dreams appeared. If it was before, May would not be afraid of dying, but she felt that it was different now. She did not want to die anymore. To their dismay, Mark did not speak but nodded in agreement. He had no way of seeing the whole environment in his dream due to the circumstances and the flames that surrounded the place. One thing he was sure, however, was the red bus on the rightmost lane of the southbound half of the expressway. It was the same red-painted bus that he leaned his back on as he watched everyone being slaughtered one by one. Nevertheless, Mark kept on feeling that something was not right, that he had to glance at the moon every now and then. The moon was already shining at the center of the sky. In his premonition, by this time, he should be already in his life and death struggle. Before he was almost squashed to death, the last thing he saw was the moon at the center of the sky. "It's late," Mark muttered. Actually, if it was like this, most people would already rejoice that the disaster seemed to have passed already and nothing happened. Still, he could not shake off the foreboding feeling. He looked at Odalina and took out a phone and told him a combination of numbers. "Master, what is this for? Open it." There is only one non-system default application installed there. Every 2 hours, that application will request for a password, and you have to input the numbers I told you. While the password is not inputted, the application will lock up, and if the password is not given for another hour, the application will delete its data. Remember that unless something happened to that phone, you have to keep it from deleting the saved data. Why? Odalina was confused. The content of that data is something the scientists in Bay City will surely want. I'm sure you can use that to exchange for something important from them. Keep that phone, and if something unexpected happens and all of you need the aid from General Perez or from Captain De La Rosa, you can use that phone in exchange for their help. Odalina remembered what her master said with great importance. "Master, are you sure this will work?" To that question, Mark shrugged his shoulders while he pulled down the motorbike. Who knows? Maybe it could, maybe not. At least, there's more possibility that it will than it won't. Rumble. A loud rumbling sound echoed across the place, taking everyone's attention. The sound seemed to have come from the buildings quite a distance away to the east from their position. The sound of rumbling metal and concrete filled their ears even louder than the sound of the gunshots. Draa. Crore. Two roars of unidentified origin followed the rumbling sounds. Those coarse, ferocious and loud roars made everyone's hair stood up on ends. Bam. Rumble. The roars were followed by a loud sound of something big crushing onto a building and by the sounds of a collapsing structure. The sources of the sounds were still far away and they could not see anything, but it made the soldiers clutch their guns ready to fight anytime. Roars and sounds of collapse continued and was getting louder and louder. It was as if the sources were closing in towards them slowly. Master, I thought, you say that there should only be one? Odalina frowned, facing the direction where the loud sounds were coming from. Mark was also frowning. There should only be one, and he was sure of that. One of the roars they were hearing was familiar to him. It should be the one that's supposed to appear here and annihilate them. Hearing the frightening roars, May could not help but clutch Mark's arm. Not because she was afraid, but she suddenly felt that Mark should not follow his initial plan anymore. The things happening now were far from what he told her and Odalina. Seconds and minutes passed and the sounds became louder and louder. With uncertain event that was about to happen, the soldiers instructed everyone to move the vehicles into the further lanes and assume a defensive formation. For some random coincidence, Mark's vehicle, the MB Sprinter, was actually placed just in front of the red bus. Without the lights coming from the houses and the streets, the moon fully illuminated the place. Everyone's hearts was pounding as they all faced the same direction. Finally, the first building just on the other side of the forested block collapsed in a loud rumble. They finally had a glimpse of the source of those roars. Two terrifying monsters were in a struggle fighting each other. The first one was what caused the collapse of the building. It threw the other monster towards the building, showing its unfathomable strength. It was humanoid at a shape of a female, but it stood on its fours. No, rather than its fours, it did not have its hind legs. She was using her stone-clad hands to drag her body forward. However, even though she was crawling, her height on that position was already staggering 3 meters. Her skin was covered in rough stone. Due to her massive size, she was not too fast-moving, but her body structure was enough to make people looking at her freeze. Rumble. The second monster stood up from the collapsed building, scattering dust and debris around. The monster was actually larger and taller than the first one. It was about as tall as a 2-story house, which should be about 5 to 6 meters. Its head was too large and was shaped like a frog with its gaping large mouth. The monster's stomach was bulging and its arms and legs were all obese-looking. However, what was more noticeable was its rough skin with a metallic luster. After standing up, the frog-headed monster charged towards the stone woman. It was fast-moving despite its size and weight. It opened its mouth, lashing out its long tongue towards the face of the stone woman. The blade-covered tongue hit the stone face, causing a display of bright sparks, but the stone woman was rather unscathed. The stone woman countered with a punch, but the frog-headed monster jumped up, agilely dodging the attack. "We're not watching a movie, right?" A question from one of the soldiers slipped through the loud sounds of the fight between the large monsters. They all wished that they were just watching a movie right now. The two monsters in front of them were fighting, but no matter which one win, they had no way to fight it. Turning back where they came from? It was even more impossible. Surely by this time, that horde of millions of infected should have already reached the entrance of the expressway. They were all stuck here waiting for their deaths unless they could find a way to survive this horrifying event. Day 6 to 8:17 p.m. Southbound E3 Expressway, Parañaque, Metro Manila. Using the dump trucks and the military trucks as the outer defensive cover, the smaller vehicles managed to hide in the inner rows. The soldiers and policemen hid behind the trucks, observing the two large monsters fighting just 200 meters away from them. Not a single one of them wanted to shoot even a single shot at the monsters. The same was for the refugees and other personnel. Everyone felt nervous, but all they could do was cover their own mouths, trying not to make any sound. Just a single loud sound they made could lead to everyone's demise at this moment. Mark, hiding behind the MB Sprinter, was tightly frowning. Everything deviated too much from what should have happened. The scene in his dream, the crushed vehicles, the disembodied Irene, the killed Captain Della Rosa and Keen, the death of Odalina, Abigail and Iola, May's body that was punched with a hole on her chest. All was done by that woman clad in stone. He could never forget that. Yet, what in the world was that frog head? Mark was gravely mistaken. The future changed in a horrible way. Furthermore, he judged the enemy from his premonition wrongly. The stone-clad woman was not an infected but was actually a failed mutator. No wonder. Mark felt laughing. It was no wonder why that stone woman killed everyone first before trying to kill him. Not different from normal mutators, the savage consciousness of failed mutators also had a dominating emotion or trait on their minds. That consciousness also had intelligence and mindset different from the ones the original consciousness had. Like Odalina's, who was bloodthirsty, and Laylap's, who was ferocious. When the two were saved before their consciousness was fully consumed, Odalina changed into loyalty, and Laylap's with independence. What the stone clad on her subconscious was torment. She wanted to torment her enemies as much as possible before killing them. Irene was killed before Keen and Captain Della Rosa to torment the two. He was the last one to be killed because that stone-clad woman wanted to torment him the same way. However, how could that stone-clad woman knew the torment that the others were feeling? Unless that woman was also an empath. It was also the reason that the frog-headed infected was attacking her. **T. Mark's eyes dilated in that realization, and he suddenly looked at that stone-clad woman from behind the vehicle. The woman threw a large debris towards the frog-headed infected and was facing her enemy. Yet, Mark could feel that most of her attention was actually targeted towards them. He now noticed. Their fight was closing in towards them not by chance but because the stone-clad woman was actually approaching their direction despite being hindered by her enemy. She knew that there were people here. Mark's grave expression did not escape May, who was beside him. "Gerger, what's wrong?" May's voice snapped him back. Mark looked beside him and saw May, Odalina, Abigail and Iola staring at him with worried and scared expressions. He patted the head of the two girls and gave a tight hug at May, who did not feel happy at that hug at all. That hug, however, was not just to try and cheer up May but to also calm his mind. The people around them who saw Mark did that were not confused at all. Rather, they thought that Mark had already given up and were saying final words to his loved ones. They felt the same. Those two monsters in front of them was not something they could survive. Mark released May and did not speak and just patted her head. May, on the other hand, stared at him as he took out a radio. "Captain Della Rosa, are you there?" Mark spoke at the radio. During the time they were lining up the vehicles into formation, he heard from the radio that the soldiers had already called for reinforcements from Bay City. They also made another contact after they finally had visuals of the two unknowns in front. This voice, Mark, Captain Della Rosa's voice, sounded from the radio along with the noisy background. "How long will it take till the reinforcements from Bay City arrive here?" They said that it would take about 15 to 20 minutes. Dismay filled Captain Della Rosa's voice. "That's too long. We know, but we have no choice but to wait." Mark did not speak anymore. He knew far more than the soldiers knew about what was happening. The road was blocked and returning was not possible. To escape on foot? The stone-clad woman was an empath. It was very likely that she could also detect people like how he did. The last option was to fight, and it would surely lead to everyone's death. Even escaping while a few people stay behind to defend was also not plausible. It would be easy for the enemy to annihilate the people that stayed before pursuing the ones that escaped. The only option left was for him to distract the two away from this place, and there was no other person that would be able to do that aside from him. If it was a normal person that would do that, the frog-headed infected might follow, but not the stone-clad woman, since there were more people here. If Mark was the one to do it, he could make that woman detect that he was also an empath, and it was likely for her to chase after him. For the same reason, the frog-headed infected would surely come after him. Draa! A shriek-like roar was released out of the stone-clad woman's mouth. That scream made Mark tense up as he suddenly jumped into action. He hurriedly grabbed May and the two girls along with Odalina. He pulled them down crouching to the ground behind the MB Sprinter. Bam! Bam! Crash! Bam! Tam! A plethora of sounds echoed everywhere which caught everyone off guard. Even the soldiers who were attentively watching the fight between the two monsters were not able to react. Soon, the people were greeted to a devastating sight along with shocked and frightened shrieks to painful screams and moans. After he was sure that the sounds had stopped with only the screams and shouts left, Mark let the four stand up. What greeted them now around them was the horrifying sight. Broken windows and large gaping holes on the vehicles and cracks on the asphalt road were already mild. For the unlucky ones, quite a large number of soldiers, policemen and the refugees died on the spot, while a larger number of people were injured. Most of them even died inside their vehicles, letting their blood drip out of the doors and splash on the windows. "Master, what happened?" Odalina was too shocked. Everything was fine just now, but her master only pulled them down for several seconds and the things made a horrible turn. They then saw Mark pick up something on the ground not far from them. It was a pointed rock about the size of an 800 milliliter soda bottle. Similar looking stones also littered the road. Seeing the rock made Odalina look towards the stone-clad woman, and she saw that the silhouette of the woman was somehow thinner. It was as if she cast off a few layers of her stone armor. It was then that the people inside the MB Sprinter went out one by one in panic. "Why are you all going out? It's dangerous." Odalina hurriedly intercepted them since her two children also ran out. "Mom! Something hit the roof of the car." The scared Odette hurriedly hugged her mother and complained. What the girl said, however, made Odalina feel cold sweat on her back. The other vehicles were damaged and people even died. Whatever happened, everyone was within the range of attack. She frantically wanted to check the damage on the vehicle. Mark's voice suddenly cut her off. "Don't worry. Our vehicles are right behind the dump truck. That attack won't directly hit our cars. All you have to be worried about are stones falling from above." It was part of Mark's arrangement, and not only the MB Sprinter but also the vehicles of his friends along with Monique and Harvey's were all hidden behind the thick-plated dump trucks. He was expecting that, and it was not a one-time attack either. It was the AoE attack of that stone-clad woman which caused most of the casualties and damage in his dream. It was a rain of stones. Her body would tense up along with a shriek-like roar, and her stone armor would spit up into pointed pieces like a hedgehog. Those pointed stones would then shot away from her body at fast speeds. Each stone projectile was fast and strong enough to penetrate even armored vehicles in a direct hit, but in the least, the falling stones would not. It was likely that she used that attack to deal damage to both the frog-headed infected and to them who were watching. "Boss, are you hiding something from us?" Melissa, who also ran out of the vehicle, asked. Her question immediately stirred up the crowd. After all, that previous attack also hit their vehicle, and the result to the others was devastating. They could even see the frantic refugees asking for help, dragging their heavily injured loved ones, the soldiers that were hurriedly running here and there were even dead people around with large gaping holes on their bodies. Mark's actions since earlier were too odd, especially when he suddenly pulled May and the others down to take cover. That action was too timely to the sudden attack, despite the fact that he was not facing the battle at that time. Along with that attitude and explanation, it was as if he knew what was going to happen. After shaking his head, Mark stared at Melissa. "It's better for all of you to not know. You all should return inside the car. It might be too dangerous to others, but our vehicles are armored." "But boss," Melissa hesitated. "Just return inside. I need to find the military officers first." Mark did not speak anymore to her. After making May and the two girls stay inside the vehicle, he left towards the northern side of the convoy where the vehicles of the leaders and the Humvee Amika's family boarded were located. Along the way, She saw the dead bodies being hurriedly moved out of the pierced vehicles by both soldiers and refugees. The ones who were injured were being tended by the medics and were applied first aid despite the danger. Among the injured soldiers, Mark saw Irene. She sat on the ground behind one of the Humvees with Keen beside him clutching her left hand. On her right was the same doctor who checked Iola back then when the little girl was near death. Irene's neck and right shoulder were bleeding profusely. Looking at it, the skin on her neck and shoulder were scraped off, even revealing her white shoulder bone. It seemed that she was almost beheaded, like how she ended up in Mark's dream. Irene was lucky that she was still alive and conscious. Mark did not disturb the childhood couple and walked towards the group of soldiers and policemen nearby. There, he saw the leaders in a heated discussion. ***. We should leave this place already. Just abandon the vehicles and let's go on foot. We are nothing but sitting ducks here. I have the same idea. Those two, whatever creatures they are still in their heated battle, yet we are already receiving damage. I understand what you two wanted to say, but we won't have any way of protecting everyone on foot. If you all think that all of you can fight the infected on the way, I won't stop you. Furthermore, we had no way of moving on foot without being detected by those two unknowns. There are too many people with us. Councilor Palabrica, Congresswoman Laney and Captain Della Rosa voiced their opinions respectively. Chief Mallory was only listening at the side, and it seemed that he would go with whatever decision the others would come up with. Major Lopez, on the other hand, was on a deep contemplation. He was likely to be weighing all the advantage and disadvantages of the suggestions they gave. Don't bother with those rubbish ideas. No matter what all of you come up with, it will end up with everyone dying. It's all false hope. A man's voice suddenly joined the discussion. His voice was full of mockery for their suggestions. The voice was too confident that they would die that it made them look at the direction the voice came from. There, a man stood with a heavy bag and several weapons hanging on his body. Mark. Both Captain Della Rosa and Madame Laney called out the man's name at the same time. Day 6 to 8:23 p.m. Southbound E3 Expressway, Parañaque, Metro Manila. What do you mean? Major Lopez ignored the two that called out to Mark and asked with his eyebrows knitted tightly. His expression told how much pressure the military officer felt towards their current situation. What Mark had just said was damping water on their confused heads without even explaining his side at all. Mark turned towards the major. That stone woman there knew that there are people here, and anyone that will try to escape will be targeted by that woman first. It's not a coincidence that those two were getting closer and closer unto us when they are fighting each other. Look closely. He gestured the people to look at the two. That moment, the stone-clad woman whipped away the frog-headed infected with a swipe of her right hand. Before the infected could recover and attack once more, the stone-clad woman had already taken 3 steps back towards the direction where the convoy was. See? She's going our direction. The expression of everyone that heard him turned grave. They did not notice at first, but now that Mark mentioned it, those small movements would not escape their eyes anymore. What do you suggest that we should do? Major Lopez asked after turning back to Mark once more. Major, why are you asking a civilian for? An unfamiliar soldier tried to interrupt, but he was stopped by the major. We can't fight and we can't escape. Either way, all of us will get killed. Even if half of us fight while the others escape, how long can we hold those monsters out? We are also under-equipped for this. Unless the reinforcements from Bay City arrive, we have no way surviving this, and no one knows if we are still alive by the time they reach this place. But Major, enough, Julian. If you're not convinced, then think of a good plan yourself. The soldier finally stopped. It may be degrading as soldiers that they needed to consult a civilian for a plan, but he could really not think of a way. Now, say your piece. I doubt you're here just to ridicule us, right? Major could not help but ask when he saw Mark sneering. There's no time, so I'll get straight to the point and make it simple. You all stay here and don't leave. I will lure those two away as far as I can. When the people from Bay City arrived and I'm not here yet, you all should escape. Just wait for me at Bay City. What Mark said was really simple, but to do it was not simple at all. Isn't that dangerous for you to lure those two? Captain Della Rosa worriedly asked. If you can name someone who can replace me and last long enough till the people from Bay City arrive, then I'll gladly give the task. None of them speak after that. The cue here was not to defeat those two but to last long as much as possible. Back in Città Italia, Mark already showed that he had enough skill to react and dodge fast attacks. Besides, Mark continued, I'm not going to fight them. I'm just luring them away. You all needed to stay here to make sure that that stone woman won't be attracted to all of you suddenly escaping. As I said, the people to escape first will be targeted. What if you fail to bide for time? How are you sure that those that will escape will get attacked first? Also, how are you sure that those two monsters will follow you in the first place? Counselor Palabrica posed several questions in succession. If I fail, then you can do whatever you want. For the second question, why don't you try to do it yourself? As for how I am sure that they will follow me, I already said it. Those who flee will become the first targets. When Mark returned to where his group was positioned, almost everyone was nervously watching the fight between the two large monsters. The fight had already reached the forested area just on the other side of the expressway. The trees and buildings were already toppled and the fight between the two was getting more and more intense. Loud sounds were more audible to everyone every time the jumping frog-headed monster landed on the ground or every time the stone woman stomped her stone-covered hands. He did not watch any of those scenes and started to prepare. Now, he started to feel thankful that the frog-headed infected was there trying to kill the stone-clad woman. If not, despite knowing what would happen, he would lose the chance to think of what to do and prepare. Around him, Odalina and May waited for his instructions. Mayor, Odal, mount this on the bike. Also get several M16 magazines and fill that box on the handlebar. Mark said as he handed his M16 and bag to the two. The box he was talking about was a metal box made of thin metal sheets and small metal bars. The gun mount he made the military install in front of the motorbike was something he designed. Following the design, that box there could be attached, slide and detached from the mount, and the use of it was to make it easier for the M16 to be reloaded even if he was driving the motorbike. Mounting a machine gun at the motorbike could also do the same, but the weight would surely hinder the maneuvering, and that was why he came up with this. While the two were following his instructions, he began to work on the multi-cab carrying the LPG tanks. Checking the now metal-covered and tightly sealed back carrier of the multi-cab, he noticed a smell of petroleum faintly escaping from the carrier. When he opened that door behind, he smelled the pungent smell of leaking gas and noticed that the metal roofing had a hole. Looking on the LPG tanks under the hole, one tank was pierced by a pointed rock. Odal, can you get me the duct tape from the car? Mark called out, which Odalina immediately replied to. Using the duct tape, he sealed the hole on the roof from the inside. The next thing he did was to open the valve of every single tank inside the sealed carrier. Upon closing the door, he also covered the spaces around the door with duct tape, completely sealing the leaking gas inside. Oscar, right? Mark called unto the soldier that had driven the multi-cab. Yes, sir. Your task here is done. Call your captain here and you can go back to your unit. With a salute, the soldier went and called Captain Della Rosa. While waiting, he chained the prepared motorbike onto the side of the multi-cab. The captain came with the other leaders in tow not long after he was finished. You're ready? Captain Della Rosa asked. That's right. I will leave my group on your care. Don't forget our deal. Mark said, disregarding the others present. The word, deal, however, raised an eyebrow on the other leaders, especially Major Lopez, as they looked at the captain. Captain Della Rosa shivered with cold sweat on his back, knowing that it was likely for him to be questioned about this deal later. Unexpectedly, before the other leaders could speak, a familiar person that came with them spoke. His arms were bandaged but his eyes sparkling for some reason. It was SP-02 Agbayani. Mark, right? For you to sacrifice yourself for everyone here, I'm sure you'll be deemed by the people here. Stop. Mark interrupted with a tight frown. He really could not stomach to let this person here to finish what he wanted to say. Just the tone and how this person spoke were giving him shivers. "Police chief, can you take this guy here away?" Mark said to Chief Mallory. What? Why? SP-02 Agbayani was flabbergasted. The first time he met Mark, the person did not even let him speak. Now he was being interrupted once more and was even requested to take away. While his eyes were widened with shock, Mark spoke. "I'm not doing this to be viewed what you wanted me to be viewed, all right. If there are others who can do this without failing, then exchange with me. I'm just doing this because all of you people are freaking too incompetent." Odalina slapped her forehead hearing that. Her master had really said it. She looked around and the expression of everyone around changed dramatically. Furthermore, what he said not only impacted the soldiers and the other people but also the members of his group who had just learned what was happening from the mouths of the other people. But of course, no one here could refute him despite how what he said slapped their faces. May on the other hand knew that he said that out of irritation. Her Gurgur had already done too much this past days and he was also tired. Very tired. He was just doing this for the sake of the people in their group and to finish what he started. She was sure that if it was just her, the two little girls and Odalina and her children, even with Laylaps and Fine, they could escape this without any problem. But he was keen on paying his debt to them and it led to him doing everything by himself. It was very easy to tick him off now that he was tried and things had deviated from what he prepared for. Mark suddenly felt someone hugging him from behind. "Gurgur, don't mind them. Don't be angry anymore." Despite the piercing stares around him, he did not care and took a deep breath. "Sorry, I lost myself," Mark said calmly facing the two military officers. Unexpectedly, it was Major Lopez who replied first and even with a smile unbefitting his stern old face. However, it did not look bad at all. Rather, his smile was filled with both amazement and amusement. "Don't worry. What you said is true. All of us here are incompetent in terms of dealing with either that syndicate or those two monsters." Well, I never thought that someone would say that straight to our faces. As their highest officer admitted, the soldiers felt crestfallen. That was right. They were now relying on a civilian that they were supposed to protect. What could they be called now other than being incompetent? "I'm going already," Mark said with a serious face and looked at the major. That statement the major said completely made him fit enough to become one of his group's support once they enter Bay City. "I asked Captain Della Rosa for some arrangements. You can ask him about the details. I wish you can help with that. If it's nothing harmful or illegal, as long as your plan worked and we made it to Bay City, I'll help with all I can." Major Lopez promised and he was sincere with that. "Actually, you don't have to promise me that. I'll tell you all. If something happened to anyone in my group, if I can make those two monsters follow me, think about what else I can bring towards Bay City," Mark said with a sneer before he turned around and faced his Odal, May and the two girls that hopped off the vehicle after hearing that their father would be leaving. He hugged the two girls assuring them that he would come back with presents. "Odal, I'll leave them to you all right?" "Yes, master. By the way, if possible, bring Fine with you." Hearing that, Mark nodded. It would be another assurance for him to bring the oversized beetle with him. The last one was May. With a tight embrace Mark whispered, "Take care of yourself, all right? Don't leave Odal's side." "Yes. I'll be waiting," May replied before leaving Mark's arms. Under everyone's eyes, Mark, who took Fine with him, boarded the multi-cab and started the engine. "Time to get those two monsters away from this place," Mark murmured while he shifted the gear and started to move the vehicle out of the defensive area. He looked at the two creatures on the vacant lot on the other side of the expressway. His eyes were glowing brightly with red light. Day 6 to 8:30 p.m. E3 Expressway, Parañaque, Metro Manila. Tremors after tremors echoed as the two heavy large monsters continued to battle each other, destroying everything around them. Buildings crumbled along with trees uprooted, and even things that should be out of their reach were impacted by the thrown stones and debris. Yet, no matter how intense the battle between the two, their bodies remained almost unscathed as their attacks did little to damage the other. At that moment, A small vehicle drove out in the middle of the expressway, pointing the rays of its headlights towards the two giants. The stone-clad woman was startled to the sudden change of lighting but did not manage to stop and look due to the frog-headed infected ignoring the light and continuing its barrage of attacks. That was when the two suddenly felt an undulation of energy coming from the vehicle. The two froze and both looked at the vehicle at the same time. At that moment, the vehicle moved forward and made a sharp turn driving away towards the south. The stone-clad woman was frozen as she felt the energy that felt both attractive and dangerous at the same time. She was like a predator animal that suddenly found something unknown and curiously wanted to approach with all cautiousness. The behavior the stone-clad woman displayed, however, did not last long. It was due to seeing the frog-headed infected running after the vehicle without hesitation. Unlike the stone-clad woman who was a failed mutator and having her own consciousness comparable to a predatory animal, the frog-headed infected relied purely on impulses and instincts. The moment it felt something that attracted it more than what was in front of it, the only thing it would do was to chase after that thing. Not wanting to lose against enemy, the stone-clad woman immediately followed. The previous fight to death of the two monsters became a competition on which one of the two would catch the source of that energy. However, the stone-clad woman was obviously slower than the frog-headed infected. Due to that, the failed mutator started attacking the mutated infected, trying to stop it from reaching her prey. Despite that situation, however, the stone-clad woman still had the thought to turn her head back, checking on the movements of the humans hiding behind the large group of vehicles until the vehicles were out of its sight. Seeing the two behemoths become shadows in the veil of the night being led away by the vehicle driven by Mark, the people left behind finally sighed with relief. Even though they were still far from truly escaping, it was already a huge step towards survival. Actually, most people had no confidence about what Mark said. After all, there was truly no basis for what he said. It was just fear of annihilation and hope for survival that they complied. However, with the two monsters chasing after Mark just like how he assumed, their doubts towards him turned into belief. Due to that, none of them really thought of escaping even though the monsters were already far away. They feared that what Mark said would become true and the monsters would return to kill them all the moment they tried to leave. In the least, they should wait for the reinforcements from Bay City as they planned. Clap. Clap. Major Lopez clapped to get everyone's attention. All right, all of you incompetents. It's time to work. We can't rely on that person for everything. Of it will prove how incompetent all of you are. He bellowed to the soldiers. Being called incompetents really ticked them off, especially when it was their superior who was calling them that. They could not help but stare at Major Lopez with complaint in their eyes. Their superior, however, sneered at their expressions. What is with all that looks? If you are not incompetent, then prove it with effort. We are called incompetent because he had both skill and guts to do what we can't. If you don't want to be called that again, then do what you can do. I don't want to be called incompetent by that person again once he returned. What about you people? A chorus of agreement not only among the soldiers but also other people echoed across the place. Good. Then move. Others check on which vehicles can still run. Those who are able to, hurry up and remove the vehicles blocking the maintenance road. We just can't wait here doing nothing. Not only the soldiers but also some of the refugees helped with the instructions given by Major Lopez. One good quality a leader should have was to turn a setback into a drive to keep the team on moving forward. It was what Major Lopez had just displayed as he used Mark's contempt for their incompetence as a fuel to raise their determination. But of course, there were two who were quite unhappy with what he said. Major Lopez, right? Do you think my master will fail in luring those monsters away? Odalina asked with a stern face. Even May was glaring at him. The wrinkled face of the major suddenly looked troubled. That woman who questioned him was just as scary as those two monsters in terms of capability. Letting out a single cough to clear his throat, he replied. Ladies, we are soldiers. We don't rely on a single plan and expect it to succeed. There are always backup plans to be prepared. Besides, it's not only those two unknowns are the threat here. With all the noise that they made, it's likely that the infected will come here sooner or later. At that time, we should at least have a way to escape. The two did not pursue the issue anymore. It was just the way the major said it sounded like he was sentencing that Mark would fail. Among the people around, there were people who were still grumbling, however. Those people were members of Mark's group who knew nothing about Mark's plans, while the other one was Amika, who slipped out again, even dragging her little brother out. Looking at Mark's vehicle driving further away as they hid behind a truck, she pouted. That scary uncle did not even say goodbye. Asterisk 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 driving down the expressway, dodging the vehicles abandoned in the middle of the road. Mark continued to observe the two large monsters following behind him through the side mirrors, the multi-cab. The loud tremors behind the vehicle were even louder than the engine. Mark was also amazed how fast the frog-headed infected on chasing after him. If not for the stone-clad woman who kept on attacking the mutated infected, things would be harder in more than one reason. Mark sniffed the air around him and smelled the smell of gas. It seemed that the gas leaked inside the sealed carrier was already thick enough that it started to leak out from the carrier. Just a bit more. His eyes glowed redder and redder, urging the two giants behind to keep up with him. Not only that he needed to keep the two on following him, but also avoid the infected now wandering across the expressway. DRAAA. Well, sh*T. Mark complained as he heard that shriek-like roar. On his side mirror, he could see the stone-clad woman stop, stretching one of her stone-covered hands pointing forward. The stone armor on her palm emitted cracking sounds as it split into pointed stone shards. She was trying to launch her pointed stones forward with both the frog-headed infected and the multicab as target. He was not surprised that she could do a targeted ranged attack, as it was the same move she used to kill May in his dream. Still, whether he was surprised or not, it would be dangerous. Pulling the steering wheel to the right, he lined the multicab in front of the frog-headed infected, using it to block the woman's attack. Swoosh. Swoosh, swoosh, tang, tink, talk, craw. Several sounds of projectiles slicing the wind as they flew in fast speed sounded from behind. There was no way for Mark to count the number of the flying stones. It was then followed by a plethora of metallic sounds, followed by the painful roar of the frog-headed infected that he used as a shield. However, his vehicle was not unscathed either. He was sure that he heard a sound of impact on the carrier behind, and even the side mirror on the passenger's side was broken by one of the stone projectiles. Some of the projectiles even whooshed past the vehicle he was driving and landed on the road in front, leaving cracks on the asphalt road. He also had to maneuver away from the projectiles left on the road, since those could potentially break any of the wheels. Mark looked forward and he could see his target area. It was the circular upward curve at the intersection of the expressway. The curve was not only high but also stuck out towards the waters of the Manila Bay. Upon driving up that curve, he would abandon this multicab and go for the next step. Just a little more. He was just about 500 meters now from the entrance of the curve. Splash. Mark froze. Fine. Can I curse really hard right now? He spoke to the cowering beetle beside him with a bitter smile. That sound of splashing water was too loud that he knew that something else was coming. Of course, he expected that he might attract other infected wandering around or even other failed mutators, but he never expected it to come from the sea. Mark looked towards his right, where he detected the new enemy. All that he could see was something big swimming under the water as it splashed a large amount of water up in the air. Tisk. He just saw the head and saw that it was a very large turtle. An infected sea turtle, which was likely to be the same size as the vehicle he was driving or even a little larger. Even though it added to the danger once this turtle tried to leave the water, he also saw this as an opportunity. Once he lost these gigantic threats, it would be likely that the two giant infected would gang up on the stone-clad woman who was a failed mutator. Saving her? It did not enter Mark's mind. He was solely here to lure all of them away. Unlike Odalina, Laylaps, Jester and Keen, that he helped to overcome the alien consciousness eating their minds, the original consciousness of the stone-clad woman had already been snuffed out. In any case, she was already a lost case and was needed to be eliminated. The infected was one thing, since they could not think and their movements could be predicted. The failed mutators was another thing, as no one could predict what their new consciousness could do. Draa! Another shriek-like roar echoed from behind. Mark smiled bitterly. He knew that the stone-clad woman was frustrated as she saw the new competitor for her prey. She did not even stop running as she faced the direction where the turtle was swimming, and the stone armor on her forehead cracked before shooting off towards the swimming turtle. Unfortunately, it was a futile attempt for her. The stone projectiles were fully blocked by the turtle's shell. Still, the impact of the projectiles pushed the turtle away since it had no ground to channel the impact to. Finally, before the turtle managed to come ashore, Mark entered the branch of the road where the inclined curve was. He accelerated as fast as he could, not even thinking whether he ones chasing from behind could follow. Day 6 to 8:37 p.m. E3 Expressway Junction, Zapote v. Bacoor City, Cavite. Reaching the highest part of the curve, which was the flyover that led back to the entrance of the expressway which they passed before, Mark stopped the multi-cab after assuring that the pursuers were not on the immediate distance behind. Looking over the metal barrier at the side of the road, he saw what was happening below. As he expected, the three gigantic monsters did not lost him but were engaged in a 2-on-1 fight at the entrance of the curve. Since the curved road was made only for those vehicles entering Bacoor City, the width of the road was way smaller. With the time allowance, Mark hurriedly unchained motorbike hanging at the side of the multi-cab. Inspecting the motorbike, he saw that the tail and the seat seemed to be hit by the stone projectiles earlier. Fortunately, everything else were still intact, especially the engine and the wheels. It could still be driven. Nevertheless, he needed to get rid of the three first, or he would not be able to return at all. Mark then looked at the exit of the flyover. It seemed that the infected spotted him due to the lights from the multi-cab and were now running towards him. He did not have much time. With a tick of his mind, the glow on his eyes flared once more, stopping the fight below. They all looked at him and hurriedly tried to find a way to reach his position. The infected really had no brains at all. Seeing that he was above, the two infected rushed towards him, even jumping onto the man-made lake at the center of the curve. On the other hand, the stone-clad woman circled following the road, rushing up towards his position. Time to move. Mark pushed the motorbike away from the multi-cab that was already leaking of gas fumes. He then wore his backpack on his front. Fine. On my back, on that command. The fearful beetle latched on his back before he sat on the motorbike and started the engine. He then pulled out the grenade launcher he brought and aimed at the multi-cab. Bam! The frog-headed infected jumped onto the flyover, scaling the height of more than 3 meters instantly. It jumped even nearer to him than the multi-cab. However, it was not time yet to make the multi-cab explode. He shifted his aim towards the approaching mutated infected and shot. Thump! Bam! Craw! The frog-headed infected staggered backwards with a roar after the launched grenade shell exploded on its face. If it was like other infected, that explosion was already enough to smash its brain into thousands of pieces, but its steel body prevented that from happening. There were dents on its face as the proof that it was hit, but that was it. Mark did not laze around and immediately loaded another shell into the grenade launcher and fired once more, making the frog-headed infected stagger backwards even more. The stone-clad woman and the frog-headed infected were both near the multi-cab now. As for the gigantic turtle, he could not do anything about it and could only let it pace around below the flyover. Thump! Bam! Mark launched his next shell and it was towards the abandoned multi-cab. Boom! Following the sound of the exploding shell, the gas fumes leaking from the multi-cab caught fire and the whole multi-cab exploded afterwards. The tremor from the explosion was too much that it felt like an earthquake from where Mark positioned himself. The light coming from the explosion lit up the dark night due to the flames that suddenly rose up in the air. Metal debris from the stored LPG tanks flew away in random directions, and even Mark had to dodge some as he retreated. Due to being too close to the multi-cab, the two monsters were heavily impacted. Both were not dead yet, but they were visibly injured. The frog-headed infected plopped to the asphalt with its metal skin turning red hot due to the temperature of the flames. The stone-clad woman, on the other hand, had cracks all over her body. Was it over? Mark murmured but was then stunned. He just cursed himself. Both of the enemies were not dead yet. As the frog-headed infected could not move, it switched its target towards the stone-clad woman who was near it. It shot its barbed and bladed tongue towards the failed mutator wrapping her cracked body. The stone-clad woman was also barely moving at all. When it saw that its body was wrapped with the disgusting tongue, it did something inconceivable. She curled her body into a ball while she was being pulled towards the large mouth of the mutated infected. The cracked stones on her body stood up like a rolled hedgehog. Mark was shocked seeing that scene. It totally felt like the stone-clad woman was going to self-destruct. He hurriedly pulled the gas handle of the motorbike and immediately left the vicinity. Crack. Creak. Those creepy sounds echoed from behind, but Mark did not look back. He started firing the assault rifle mounted on the motorbike, killing the infected, blocking the way. Blagam. The uncanny sound of stones exploding entered his ear and stones rained from behind him. Gui. Fine suddenly cried out. Mark saw that a pointed stone whizzed by his side and tore off one of the poor beetle's legs that latched on him. Mark felt bitter as he saw the torn-off tarsus part of its right rear leg flew off to the side. Another stone whizzed to his left. It tore off his jacket and Mark felt that his skin was scraped by that stone. That same stone broke the left side mirror of the motorbike. Mark wanted to complain. He was good at and liked playing Danmaku kinds of games where he controlled the character destroying every enemy while dodging a hell rain of bullets. However, using a mouse and a controller to dodge bullets was way different compared to controlling your whole body to dodge a barrage of bullets from behind. Not to mention that he also needed to pay attention to the incoming infected from the direction he was facing. Bam! A sound of his rear wheel exploding entered his ears and his motorbike started to lose balance. Due to the speed he was driving at, his body was thrown off the moment the motorbike was knocked to the ground. He could only curl his body to lessen the impact as he fell and rolled in the middle of the road. Fine, who was in pain due to its broken leg, was not able to react either and was separated from Mark when they fell. A short fall and strong impact on Mark's back that shook his organs stopped his roll. He swallowed the iron taste in his mouth and looked at his surroundings. It seemed that he had fallen off the flyover. Luckily, he was already away from the highest part of the ramp or things might have gotten worse. The decision he made to wear his backpack on his front also removed the chance of him receiving more pain when he fell. When he looked up, he hurriedly pulled his shotgun and fired in front of him. The infected shambling towards him immediately fell with a smashed head. Luckily, it was an eater. If it was a biter, it would have lunged at him already and he would not be able to resist due to his weakened body. Fine. Mark called out from above after he sluggishly stood up. He could ignore the pain, but the weakness brought by the pain was not something that could be removed instantly. After he called, he saw the huge beetle drop from the side and buzzed its wings mid-fall. The beetle landed in front of him crestfallen. Beetles had no ability to regenerate their legs. He hoped that its mutation made it able to, or it would be a permanent disability. Looking around, Mark found that the infected around was already gathering towards him. He looked further trying to find a building to stop by and saw a 3-floored unfinished building on a squatter's area just to the south. Fine. Can you still fly? GWEE. Fine weakly responded, but Mark knew that it could. He made the beetle latch onto his back once more and with the beetle's help, they flew towards that building he saw. He could not care any more about the aftermath or whatever happened to the frog-headed infected and the stone-clad woman. He should wait first for the weakness of his body and his injuries to heal before checking. After reaching the unfinished 3rd floor, Mark found that the building was heavily barricaded, but it seemed that the 2 people that barricaded themselves here had already passed away. He saw 2 bodies on the 2nd floor bedroom lying on the bed as if they were asleep. If not for the almost empty bottle and tablets of sleeping pills on the floor, Mark would not know what happened to the 2. Picking up an empty bedroom, Mark plopped his body to the floor as a sudden weakness enveloped his body. It was opposite of what he had expected. With his regeneration rate, he should be recovering already, but what was happening was the complete opposite. GWEE. Fine seemed to be worried about his condition. It seemed that it also felt that something was not right. The beetle paced around Mark as if checking his body. When it suddenly cried out loud, "Gweeee, Gwee." It was looking at his left arm where the sleeve of the jacket had been torn open. Fighting the weakness he felt, he raised his left arm. His eyes dilated. There was an open wound about an inch long on the back of his wrist. The problem was not only the wound that was not healing, but the skin around the wound was tainted with black color. The veins around the wound also became prominent through the skin, and around the black-colored skin was the skin that had already started to turn pale. It was the sign of infection, but how? He was only hit by a stone from a failed mutator. Mark questioned himself and suddenly recalled several things. Before the stone-clad woman released that barrage of stones, her body was partly wrapped with the tongue of the frog-headed infected. It enlightened him of his bad luck. It was likely that the stone that hit his arm either tore through or was smeared with saliva from the tongue that wrapped around her body. Mark sighed as he took out his favorite notebook and wrote a letter despite his shivering hand. He then took out all his important things, especially his phone and the camera he always had on his collar. Putting everything in the bag, even that guns that were small in size, he handed the bag to Fine with the notebook separated. "Fine, you should return and carry these for me. Gwee." The beetle sounded sad and even nudged Mark with its horns. "Just go. I promise that I will follow all of you to Bay City, remember?" With that, Mark forced himself to see Fine fly off from the unfinished third floor. When he could not see the beetle anymore, he went back inside and sat beside the empty bed. He was not dispirited at all. Would he turn into an infected or become a mutator? Mark wanted to listen to some anime music, but he already sent his phone back. He could only hum the song on his own. Paha. Blood spurted from his mouth. Mark did not know what would happen, but he was sure of something. Someone would not let him die. Right? Freed. Day 6 to 8:40 p.m. E3 Expressway, Parañaque, Metro Manila. The soldiers, the police and the volunteers were not even halfway on removing the vehicles that blocked the maintenance road when the infected started coming in large numbers. The infected came from the east side where the walls, buildings and trees were toppled and destroyed because of the fight between the two large monsters. It was also likely that these infected came here due to the loud sounds from the battle. After establishing a defensive formation on the other side of the safety railings, the soldiers and police started to fight back. The remaining people, on the other hand, continued to work on removing the abandoned vehicles. Removing the vehicles was not easy due to some that had already crashed onto others and were left in hard-to-remove positions. Furthermore, they only have one dump truck to use for pulling out the stuck vehicles, since the wheels of the others were torn with holes at the time the stone-clad woman released her first barrage of stone projectiles. Among the people helping in removing the vehicles and tending to the injured people were the members of Mark's group. What Mark said about incompetence earlier also impacted them heavily. They should not rely solely on their leader and should also improve themselves. In the middle of their respective duties, boom! A flash of bright light and the smoked light from flames could be seen more than a kilometer away from the southern part of the expressway. The loud sound of explosion followed afterwards. Those who saw Mark fiddle within the multi-cab and smelled the leaking gas before immediately remembered the scene. There could be no other source of that explosion aside from Mark. May and Odalina felt nervous seeing that explosion. The two could only wish that Mark was fine. Despite what everyone felt seeing that explosion, they continued their current work. Several minutes after the explosion occurred, there was still no sign of Mark returning. Instead, they saw a car-sized shadow moving along the expressway from the south, which alarmed everyone. It was because the shadow did not look like a vehicle at all but a creature. Another defensive formation was made to defend against that incoming creature. When it finally got closer, they saw that it was a large sea turtle with bloody wounds and festered skin and scales. An infected sea turtle. The soldiers opened fire, boring holes on the turtle's skin, causing blood to splatter around. The shell, on the other hand, completely deflected the bullets that hit it. Furthermore, the turtle continued to charge towards, telling everyone that their guns were insignificant. "Shoot the eyes! Shoot the eyes!" one of the soldiers bellowed, causing everyone to aim at the eyes of the turtle. With the concentrated gunfire its eyes received, the eyes of the turtle bled profusely as the eyes were almost crushed. Deprived of its sight, the turtle slowed down for a second before charging once more. The shocked soldiers started to scatter as the large turtle trashed their defensive line. The turtle trashed around, even hitting some vehicles away as it could not see. One of the soldiers had his left leg hit by one of the smaller vehicles that was flung away. Odalina and Keen joined the combat against the turtle. Odalina caught the head of the turtle and slammed it on the asphalt, while Keen pierced its eyes with a half-meter bone spike sticking out of his palm. Finally the turtle stopped moving. It was then that they heard sounds coming from the northern side of the expressway and saw several pairs of lights approaching. Finally, the reinforcements from Bay City arrived. As the situation was getting dangerous with the infected from the areas east of the expressway starting to come in larger numbers, the plan to remove the vehicles on the maintenance road was stopped. Everyone decided to abandon the vehicles here and the vehicles, especially the armored and military vehicles, to be retrieved later. The most important thing now was to get everyone, especially the injured, to safety. Seeing two of the people that led the reinforcements, Odalina was surprised. They were familiar since she met the two before. Angeline's brothers, Raphael and Gabriel. Apparently, the two came here to give them preferential treatment, which became the source of envy for the other refugees, but with how their group performed all this time, no one voiced their dissatisfaction. While Odalina led their group on relocating their things onto the vehicles designated to them, something unexpected occurred. A bright violet light started to shine from inside the vehicle, and the light was too bright that it even shined through the heavily tinted windows. "What is happening?" Major Lopez asked Odalina, but seeing the surprise not only on Odalina but also on the faces of the other members of the group, it seemed that they also had no idea. No one was inside the vehicle since they were outside doing things and moving some of the items, and none of them saw what happened. They only knew what could possibly be the source of the light. It was the crystals that Mark owned. The curious soldiers cautiously closed in to investigate, but then, the light reached its peak that it started to be painful to the eyes. At that moment, some sort of force field became visible covering the whole vehicle. If it was during the day, the force field could not be seen, but since it was dark and only the moon from the sky illuminating almost everything, the force field became faintly visible. One of the soldiers touched the force field and immediately pulled back his finger in pain. His finger was singed. There was no appearance of electricity, but the soldier said that it felt like he was electrocuted. Unexpectedly, a child walked past everyone, closing in towards the vehicle. Iola. May hurriedly caught up to her in panic and pulled her into her embrace. She saw what happened to that soldier and it could be dangerous to approach the vehicle. When May looked at Iola's face, however, she looked dazed and her eyes were glowing with two colors. Iola's left eye was glowing red while her right eye was glowing purple. "Iola, wake up!" May shook the little girl. The others also approached to check what was happening. When they all saw the little girl's glowing eyes, gasps could be heard around them. It seemed that the girl snapped from her daze and looked at May. "They wanted to go to Papa. Papa needs them," Iola spoke with a sleepy voice. There was no need for those in the know to guess what the little girl was talking about when they look at the vehicle and see that bright purple light. Did something happen to Gerger? May's mind was in turmoil. Buas. A loud buzzing sound was heard which made the soldiers aim their guns at the sky. "Don't shoot! Don't shoot!" Captain Della Rosa stopped the soldiers. Soon, a large red-colored beetle landed next to May and Odalina carrying Mark's bag. Everyone's expressions sunk. However, May did not lose hope. With what Iola just said, it was likely that her Gerger was still alive. Fine then nudged May with his horn, calling her attention, and pointed at the pocket of the backpack. Inside the pocket was a notebook. The notebook was the one Mark always used. May took out the notebook, flipped on it looking for something. There, she found it on the latest page. Mark's message was written on that page. The message was short and it seemed that he was having a hard control on writing it since the lines were inconsistent compared to his other writings, but the message had a solid meaning. Wait for me. I think I'll be late, but I'll return. I promise. Take care of yourselves. Also take care of my things. I can't live without those. May felt sad, but she smiled. Like usual, Gerger worries about unnecessary things. She turned to Iola, who was still in her embrace. The light on the little girl's eyes had grown stronger. Iola, Gerger needs the crystals, right? Iola absent-mindedly nodded. Let's go together. May held the little girl's right hand and they walked together into the force field. Abigail also wanted to follow, but May stopped her. She had a feeling that she and Iola could enter but not others. It was dangerous and the soldiers tried to stop the two, but with Odalina's help, the two managed to ignore the obstructions. When the two entered the force field, a scene unexpected to everyone unfolded. Iola was not affected by the force field and entered safely. On the other hand, May was different. It was as if the energy within the force field was avoiding her body. There was even an allowance around her skin that the light avoided to touch. The two entered the vehicle and went out carrying a jar emitting light. Inside the jar was an otherworldly scene. Despite the light being painful to the eyes, none of them were able to stop staring at the scene. Seemed to come out of a fantasy story. A double terminated crystal suspended in the air inside the jar and several more marble-sized crystals floating while circling around the larger crystal in a horizontal orbit. Some of the marble-sized crystals even had different colored orbs inside. What is that? One of the soldiers around muttered, but no one could answer his question. Iola held the jar with both hands. May could not hold the jar for some reason, and it could be seen that some of her pale, smooth fingers were singed. Roaa! Guru! The infected started to go berserk as they charged towards their direction. The soldiers on the defensive line started to call for assistance. Crash! The jar exploded, causing Iola's arms and face to bleed due to the glass fragments that hit her, but she did not react to it. She did not feel any pain. In front of her, the crystals were suspended in the air. Go! Iola whispered. The crystals protected by the force field started to rise up in the air under everyone's watch. The light from the crystal lit up the whole area once more before it started flying to the south. Along with the leaving crystal, the attacks of the infected weakened. The scene looked like something that came out of a movie and everyone was attracted to it. They watched the glowing crystals fly away until the crystals were out of sight. The light on Iola's eyes flickered and started to dim. The moment the light vanished, the little girl's dazed eyes closed and she started to fall backwards. May, who was behind Iola, hurriedly caught her and lifted her up. Holding the unconscious girl in her embrace, May called Abigail and they made their way towards the vehicle they were supposed to ride on, ignoring the inquisitive stares of the people around. Before May entered the new vehicle, she turned her head towards the direction the crystals flew. We'll be waiting. Please, come back safely. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. It was pitch black. Mark did not know if he had already opened his eyes or not. He could not see anything around him. Strange enough, he could see his arms, his hands, his clothes. Despite the darkness, he could see his body as he sat on the ground. What is happening? Mark thought as he tried to remember what happened. He was infected and his strength was escaping his body. He felt pain as if his blood vessels were swelling and his heart was pounding too loud that he could hear it in his ears. His head felt like it was being split into two and his flesh felt like it was being seared over strong fire. Then, a bright purple light blinded his eyes and he felt a searing pain in his right arm before everything turned into darkness. Plop, plop. While he was thinking deeply, he heard sounds behind him. It sounded like steps on the puddle of water. Mark turned his head towards the sound and saw a young man, probably about 20 years old, walking towards him. He could be younger or older, around that. What caught his attention was not the man's handsome but cute face that was similar to Korean stars, but his bright golden hair that seemed to glow through the darkness. The young man smiled with a refreshing friendly smile and stretched his arms wide as if he was pointing at the whole place surrounding them. He then spoke. It would be the first time for us to meet like this. Let me introduce myself. I'm Friodelius Arishdalia. You can also call me Fried as usual. Welcome to your subconscious world. Asterisk 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 end of Volume 3 Friodelius Arishdalia. No, Fried. He stood there in front of Mark with his friendly smile, welcoming him in this dark world. And he was greeted with silence. Mark stared at him silently, without any expression or even any urge to reply. His lips started to twitch and his smile started to crumble. Damn it. Can't you even follow the norm even for a short time? You should ask questions like where this place is or what is going on, right? Fried started to feel depressed. Mark was still staring at him blankly. You're too boring, you know that. Well, thank you. Mark finally replied. It's not a compliment, I know. Fried stared at Mark, who was calmly looking at him. I give up, he said as he walked towards Mark and sat in front of him. The two men stared at each other for some time without talking. In the end, it was still Fried who broke the silence. You're not going to ask me something? You have questions, right? I have a lot of questions, but I don't know where should I start. Mark shrugged his shoulders. Fried stared at him. If you're looking for something to start from, you better start working on your own emotions and showing it on your face genuinely. Really, seeing you having a straight poker face since the start is really irritating. He said to Mark with all seriousness, which made Mark start to touch his face. Why isn't it working? Mark said with all confusion as he judged his current expression with his hands. Of course, it won't work. Fried felt helpless facing the poor guy in front of him. As I said, we're in your subconscious right now and it will only show your genuine emotions on your face. You don't have the ability to show your fake expressions that you always do in here. Hearing that, Mark finally stopped touching his face, revealing his blank look once more. That face made Fried sigh once more. Fried knew the reason of this. This was the true face of Mark, a blank one without emotions. The expressions he always showed outside was all his practiced reflex and voluntary expressions in order to react to the circumstances around him. His smiles, his shock, his bitter expressions and the other expressions he showed outside were all fake. His true face was nothing but a blank slate. The only times he showed his true expressions was when he was truly overwhelmed with a particular emotion, and his expression at that time was truly different from his rehearsed ones. This was one of the reasons there were many times that he was reacting about something else less crucial when he had to react to something more important in front of him. It was all due to him being an extraordinary empath. Since the time he started to absorb the emotions of others without rest and control, he started to confuse which emotion he was having. Both his emotions and the emotions of other people scrambled inside his head started to overwhelm his own. The manifestation of his emotions started to weaken and the expressions on his face started to stop showing. In order to cope with things, he started to practice his expressions in order to at least show a reaction to others when he needed to. Now that Mark did not have a body to control, his real expressions were revealed bare. Rather, there was no expression on his face at all. Fried sighed again. You should really work on that. May really liked it when you show your true smile. He said while looking at Mark with a bitter smile. You even know that, huh? I don't know how she found about it though. Mark replied, remembering how May's eyes lit up when his true expressions came out and how she looked sad when he showed his fake ones. Finally, Mark looked straight at Fried. Just what are you anyway? I don't think that you're just some alter ego I created in my mind, right? Well, I think you're not someone to take over my body and replace me. Even though you took control of my body several times in the past and gave me a lot of headache, you never harmed me intentionally and even saved me several times from death. Hearing that question, Fried finally smiled with excitement. It was as if he was waiting for it for a long time. Then, what do you think am I? Probably a transcendent consciousness or a foreign soul residing inside my body like a parasite. Hey, Fried shouted, interrupting Mark, and stood up. That's rude, you know that. Mark just shrugged Fried's retort and waited for his answer. Seeing Mark stare at him blankly again, Fried felt as if his energy was draining faster. His emotions scattered in the non-existent floor. I should answer your question, right? Fried asked weakly, which Mark nodded to. All right. Behold. Fried picked up him emotions that scattered in the floor and yelled with a smile. Plop. Plop. He then tapped his shoes on the ground, creating that water drop-like sound. Mark then felt dizzy as the darkened surroundings started to distort. A sudden bright light momentarily blinded him, making him close his eyes. When he opened his eyes, the dark surroundings were gone. What replaced it was the blue sky filled with white clouds. Below him were large green forests, and afar were tall stone-covered mountains. He realized that he was sitting suspended in the air, but he never felt like he was going to fall. Finally, he turned to Fried, who was looking at the scenery with a nostalgic expression. It was as if he longed for this scene, this place. He looked like someone who had long gone far from his home and could never come back anymore. Seeing Fried's expression, Mark did not try to disturb his reminiscence and started to observe the magnificent scene further. On the forest below were oddly shaped trees with reddish smooth bark and circular leaves, along with other trees that never existed on Earth. He then saw a bird about the size of a seagull flying above the forest. It had an elongated beak shaped like a flamingo's but had wings that looked like an eagle's. The body of the bird was shaped like a pigeon's and its tail was like a rooster's. Furthermore, its feathers were composed of black and white alternating colors with a red crown on its head. He realized that this scene in front of him was not from Earth at all. When he looked around, Mark saw a city from afar. The city looked like something that came from sci-fi movies, with circular buildings and glass-covered highways. At the center of the city was a large stronghold-like building with several tall towers around it. Atop the tallest building was a holographic emblem looking like a royal family's from fantasy novels. He looked at the sky and there were actually 2 small suns and 2 moons, despite that it was during the day. Mark looked back at Fried. The latter was already looking at him, taking pride with the scene around them. Let me introduce myself again, Fried said as the blue polo, black slacks pants and red shirt he was wearing started to distort. His clothes became a robe armor with elegant royal style, but it had a right shoulder armor extending to his arms and into a glove. The glove had a marble-sized crystal at the center, and the light from the crystal extended towards the crystal tubes on the armor, giving a sci-fi vibe on it. The marble-sized crystal looked familiar. I'm Friodelius Arishtalia, the young king of the former kingdom of Arishtal in the planet we call Arielis. Fried bowed. You're right. I'm not an alter ego you created. I'm a consciousness that drifted thousands of years in space before finding you when we arrived here in Earth. Fried raised his right hand to his chest. You must be thinking how and when. I'm not. Mark looked at the crystal on Fried's glove. You entered my body 6 years ago from that crystal with a golden orb inside, right? The one on your glove looked identical, just different in color. Seriously, you're no fun at all. Fried smiled bitterly. Well, that shortens the need to explain, I guess. Say, this planet called Arielis. It's not some world from a parallel universe, right? Since you said that you have been drifting in space, then, this planet is somewhere within the same universe. Probably in another galaxy, am I right? So, you're an alien. Mark examined Fried as if trying to unravel what he really looked like. Fried sighed. This is my true appearance, you know that. I'm not some grayling or reptilian in disguise. Overwhelmed by confusion and curiosity, Mark finally let out an uncertain expression. Fried felt satisfied seeing that Mark showed that kind of face. I'm also human. No, the people from our planet are also humans. It's just we were raised in a different planet. In fact, our ancestors came from here, Earth. Fried started to tell his origins. Their ancestors came from the older civilizations of humans on Earth. Probably, it was even a civilization that was not recorded in history of any of the current countries. It was a lost civilization. It was not that they managed to build a ship or any vessel that could traverse space. Their civilization was coerced by the creatures they acknowledged as gods to ascend to another plane, another world. It was because a disaster was about to happen on Earth. They did not know that those gods they acknowledged were actually extraterrestrial beings that guided the civilizations to develop at that time. The disaster then came. Earth was submerged in water through endless days of rainfall. At that time, the people of their civilization had already left using a very large vessel that could traverse through the sky and through space. Their ancestors were made to sleep inside coffins made of metal and glass. The moment they woke up, they were already at another blue planet called Arielis. Through the guidance of their gods, their civilization developed quickly and even way faster than the civilizations left in Earth developed. Even in the modern times, Earth was still struggling with the development of land vehicles, but Arielis was already exploring the planets around them without any problems. One of the reasons of their fast development was because the whole Arielis was managed by a single monarchical government. Even though there were still internal disputes over power, country-destroying wars did not happen to hinder their development. Freed was the latest, the youngest and the very last king in the history of Arielis. He was also the last member of the royal family of Arishtal in existence. It was because the planet they called home, the planet they called Arielis, was nothing but a speck of debris floating in space now. "So, your planet was destroyed?" Mark asked. "Unfortunately, yes." Freed sounded sad and emphasized the current scene around them. "This scene you see here is actually the last scene of peace in our planet before it fell into chaos. It was the day before the fall of our planet started." Freed suddenly looked at the sky. "Look, it is coming." Mark traced the direction Freed was looking at and also stared at the blue sky. Boom! A scene of several bright lights exploding in the atmosphere following a sound of explosion and the shockwave that blew away the birds, trees and even buildings. "Familiar, right?" Mark blankly nodded. The scene currently unfolding in front of them was similar to the video he saw in the internet several days ago. "Did your planet get infected with mutagen?" Seeing the scene in front of them, Mark could not help but ask. Now he was frowning. He was truly feeling the threat Earth could possibly face in the future. If it was really mutagen, it would not be long before Earth followed the path planet Arielis took. Surprisingly, Freed shook his head. "Just watch." Freed urged Mark to watch the scene around them. Like a fast-forwarded scene, the birds that were flying high before they were blown away started to grow in size and started to grow features way different from their initial appearance. The mutated birds of different species started to fight. Then, the unexpected scene happened and the expected physical fight did not happen. Instead, one bird threw fireballs to another bird while another released electricity around its wings. Icicle spikes were conjured in front of one bird and the icicle spikes flew like a bullet and skewered the bodies of the enemy birds around it. It looked like a scene from an anime adaptation of a certain monster battling and hunting game. The scene flashed and they were suddenly in the middle of the city. The fascinating city before became a scene of destruction. People wearing odd-looking clothes were running away while many people had turned into zombie-like creatures. There were different-looking ones which had similarities to a mutated infected, but they were actually hurling magic-like attacks on the soldiers defending the civilians. Even though the soldiers were wielding laser and plasma rifles, it did not have effect on some of the magical zombies since some of them conjured wind barriers and energy barriers around them. Some of them could even fly. This was not mutagen. Even though the transformation and the symptoms were similar, it was way more dangerous than mutagen. It was no wonder that despite being an advanced civilization, Arielis lost this war. The scene flashed and fast-forwarded. A woman bitten by the zombies in front of Mark and Freed did not turn. Instead, the bite wound started to heal and her hair started to change color. Her hair turned crimson as if her hair was colored with flames. She recovered from her pained and weakened state and started conjuring flames on her hand. She started to fight the zombies with her new power and protected the innocent people. Mark watched the woman and he could link her to the mutators infected by mutagen. "Get it now?" Freed spoke. "That is why I did not recognize it first when I woke up few days ago when you fought with Odalina. Mutagen seems similar but also different to the infection we experienced in our planet. The main difference I can see is that mutagen affected creatures more on physical aspect while psi-pathogen affected creatures on a mental aspect. You call it psi-pathogen? Mark questioned. That's right. It is because it turns almost everyone infected by it into psychics, or in another term, espers. Fried affirmed. Our scientists found out that psi-pathogen could either change or enhance the human brain enough for us to be sensitive and able to control forces and energies around us. It was never understood how the change or enhancement were chosen for every ability, but it was confirmed that people with the same bloodline as those that became psychics first had a higher chance to become one. That's the same as what I assumed. Mark said. You're right. There are a lot of similarities between mutagen and psi-pathogen. Even though the effects to those who were infected were different, I'm sure that both pathogens came from the same source. Fried agreed once more. Or maybe, the other was a mutated pathogen of another. Mark thought, making Fried nod. So, you're also a psychic from that pathogen, right? I am. I'm sure. My hair gave it away. The scene flashed once more and they were transported in a room where Fried, about a year or two younger, was lying in a large regal bed. He was obviously in pain and his arm was bleeding. Around him were his officials and two beautiful girls sat to the right of his bed worriedly looking at him. Behind the two girls was a man about the same age as Fried, looking all serious. Before Mark could ask, Fried started to talk. A levitating infected managed to sneak into the castle and killed almost everyone. My father, who was the king, the queen, my mother, the crowned prince, the soldiers and even maids and other officials. A lot of people died. Fried looked at Mark with a helpless smile. I'm not really the crowned prince. I'm the second prince, the first son of the king on the first concubine, who was my mother. In that attack, in order to protect the first princess, who was my sister, from the second concubine, I was bitten. Luckily, I did not die and became a psychic and also inherited the throne that way. Fried looked at the younger girl and approached. He tried to touch her head. Unfortunately, everything around them was not real and his hand only passed through her. This is my beloved sister, Eulalia. We've been too close since we were kids and she was even closer to me than my mother. Fried glanced at the other girl, but he did not introduce her to Mark. Mark noticed the mixed emotions Fried had for that girl. He was sad, lost, angry and happy at the same time. Seeing that Mark noticed his emotions, Fried inhaled deeply and spoke. This one here is Amisha. My childhood friend and supposed to be my fiancée. The one I loved. You two did not end up with each other. I don't think the reason is that she died. Mark voiced his assumptions, making Fried shake his head with a bitter smile. When I became the king, I can't participate anymore in the front of the defense. I'm the final pillar holding the kingdom. Once I die, our civilization would have crumbled faster. Fried looked at Amisha and the man standing behind her with complex emotions. Amisha, along with my best friend Aurelian, led the battle together since both of them became psychics too. In the middle of the long defense against the zombies, they helped each other, protected each other, and fell in love to each other. Fried squatted on the side of the bed watching the unconscious younger version of him. They told me what happened and apologized. I was angry at that time. I called them traitors and wanted to banish them out of what remained of the kingdom. But I held it in. I just wished them to be happy since both of them were important people to me. You can say that it was the magnanimity of a king. So, you've been NT-red and you accepted it like that. Mark said expressionlessly with his arms crossed. Damn. Do you really have to ruin the atmosphere that way? Fried shouted. His nose was blowing smoke. What happened then? Mark shrugged Fried's angry shout. Calming down, Fried continued. They vowed to protect me, the king, to their last breath as atonement to their sins. That, however, caused them to be nothing but puppets to my control. If I wanted to do something to them, they would not be able to refuse since their former status was stripped from them with that vow. Well, they really fulfilled that promise. They really died protecting me, so I can't say too much. The scene flashed. The city was gone. Bodies over bodies of dead people littered the former city that was nothing but a wasteland now. Freed along with 50 psychics were fighting on their own, and the young Eulalia was even among them. There were no soldiers anymore, and there were no other people to help them. Aside from the zombies that they were fighting, a creature as tall as a mountain was moving from afar. For sure, that creature was even larger than Mount Everest. It was a creature with millions of eyes and thousands of more than kilometer-long tentacles. A bright light flashed and a large ray of red-hot beams seared across the battlefield from that gigantic creature. The target was none other than Freed, who was at the center of the battlefield. Aurelian, who had the best reflex, managed to react and pushed Freed away and ended up being hit by the beam of light. He died with his body split slanted from his armpit to his waist. However, before everyone could react to his death, another beam flashed towards Freed, and Amisha was the one to block it. Her forehead was pierced by that light and she fell beside the decapitated body of Aurelian. It was a losing fight. Everyone was dying one by one. Even Eulalia died soon after. It did not take long and only 2 people were left. They were Freed and a woman wearing a hood he was protecting. In the last moment, Freed helplessly nodded to the hooded woman behind him. Mark could not make out her face due to the hood, but he could see that she had a bright glow on her eyes. Her left eye was glowing red while her right was glowing purple. She took out a crystal that could not be any more familiar to Mark. It was the double-terminated crystal with marble-sized crystal orbiting around it. The marble-sized crystals flew towards every dead body of psychics and started glowing. Soon, each crystal had a glowing orb inside them. With a flick of her hand, the crystals returned and orbited around the larger crystal one more. Then, the woman clasped the crystal above and below, causing it to glow brighter and brighter. A force field was erected preventing anything from entering aside from Freed and the woman. With the force field enveloping the two, the crystal flashed and their bodies fell down to the ground lifeless. What replaced them were 2 more crystals with glowing orbs inside that started orbiting around the largest one. The crystal immediately flew away out of the planet, leaving everything behind. The scene flashed once more and they were already outside the Arielles. The blue planet had already changed its color. As if a balloon filled with air, it suddenly exploded. The crystal that was escaping was swept away by the explosion and its force field dimmed despite the fact that it was already several hundred thousands of kilometers away. The crystal then drilled itself, entering a large stone debris from Arielles, hiding from every danger. More than 1,000 years passed. The stone debris found its destination, the blue planet and the mother planet of their ancestors. However, before the debris could enter the planet, it was shot down and exploded. Most of the crystals were lost around the world while only 3 remained around the large crystal. The next that happened was what Mark knew. So, you really traveled using those crystals, huh? We did. I and the woman you saw behind me. We call her Keeper. The crystal was a manifestation of her ability, and it can be used in many ways, and not only to store abilities of psychics, mutators and infected. It could do a lot more. Then, why did you choose me and what do you need from me? If you ask me to save the world, then I'll totally decline. Don't worry, I won't ask for something stupid as that. Freed smiled. Though, I won't force you to do it. What I want is for you to find out what was the source of this mess. That's only if it's possible. I'm sure, whether it was psi pathogen or mutagen, there should be some place they came from, right?